I I have the pleasure this morning of introducing our guests and speakers. Well, they're not guests anymore; they're members. Bob and Susan Allison um, moved from the state of Maine and came to South Carolina last summer and made a new home at Summit Hills in Spartanburg. Several weeks ago, Bob and Susan formally joined our church, Central. I think their membership will be have great outcomes for Central. Delighted that we were able to persuade them to come. Let me tell you a little bit about them. Bob earned the bachelor's degree at Brown University and a PhD from the University of Chicago. He followed that with teaching at Bates College in Maine in the Department of Religion and Classics and Medieval Studies. Susan grew up in New Jersey. She also attended Brown University. Following Brown, she continued her study at the University of Chicago. Then she followed with a career in library and information technology. I'm delighted these two have joined our church. They're already respected citizens of Summit Hills community.
The mayor? Not yet. Not yet.
You know, she may be soon. I think that we're going to learn from them and we'll appreciate them. They'll be leaders at Central, and we'll learn a great deal in our experiences with them.
The only thing that was not mentioned in Dan's introduction is that we lived in Greece for 3 years. And during that time, I was conducting research at Philotheo Monastery on Mount Athos in Greece. And that's what we're going to talk about this morning. Today, I'd like to take you on a virtual pilgrimage to the Eastern Orthodox Holy Land of Mount Athos, commonly known in the Orthodox world as the Holy Mountain, and explore at the same time the mystical spirituality of the Eastern Orthodox monastic tradition that thrives in this Holy Land. For the world of Eastern Orthodoxy, including the Greek, Bulgarian, Serbian, Georgian, Romanian, and Russian Orthodox churches, the monastic community of Mount Athos is the very heart of Orthodox theology and spirituality, a pan-Orthodox Holy Land. But all faiths and all branches of Christianity are welcomed here as pilgrims. In this opening image, you are looking at one of the 20 monasteries that occupy the Athonite Peninsula in northeastern Greece. I'll show you its location on a map in a moment. This peninsula is named for the snowy mountain you see in the background, the holy mountain itself, Mount Athos, second highest mountain in Greece after Mount Olympus. This monastery is the Dionisio monastery, that is, the monastery of Dionysios. If the structure of this monastery looks peculiar to you, I should explain first that these monasteries were built for defense against Mediterranean pirates. They are like inverted castles, the defensive walls below and the monks' cells above, because the pirates attacked from the sea below. Now, if you were standing inside these walls, you would be in the monastery's courtyard. In this view, you can just barely see, if you look immediately to the right of the tower, the cross that rises from the top of the main dome of the church that stands in the center of the courtyard. For today's virtual pilgrimage, we'll be going to Philotheo Monastery. the monastery where I have been working my whole career, cataloging its manuscripts and recovering and writing its history. We'll not be looking at this monastery through scholarly eyes, however, but rather our purpose is to gain an understanding of what it means to be the spiritual heart of Eastern Orthodoxy, to experience this place as a world where the primary reality is not the material dimension of life, but rather the spiritual one. And now, for a little geographical and historical orientation, let's start right here at Central United Methodist Church, specifically out the doors of this room and down the hall to the left. The red dots on this map mark Thessaloniki, where Susan and I and our 2 boys lived for 3 years. Then over the mountains and across the landmass called the Chalkidiki is the Athonite Peninsula, the easternmost of 3 slender fingers of land extending down into the Aegean Sea. Thessaloniki, where Susan and I and our 2 young boys lived for 3 years, is the second largest city in Greece. For 3 years I walked up this street, through the gate of the old city wall into the Acropolis, and on to the Patriarchal Institute for Patristic Studies, where my office looked out across this bay toward Mount Olympus, the best office view I've ever enjoyed. But during the summer, we stayed in a small village near Mount Athos called Ourounoupolis, the City of Heaven, so named because it was on the Athonite border. This is what the Athonite Peninsula looks like from the peak of Mount Athos itself, looking north toward the mainland. The peninsula is 37.3 miles long and ranges from 4.3 to 7.5 miles wide, with a surface area of about 150 square miles. For comparison, Spartanburg has a total area of 20.37 square miles, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, so the Athonite Peninsula is a little over 7 times the size of Spartanburg. If 7 Spartanburgs were stretched out in a long, thin line, they would be comparable. The peninsula is divided into 20 sections, each managed by one of the 20 Athonite monasteries. Within the territories of the 20 monasteries are various smaller monastic houses. Smaller monasteries called skeets, for example. And hermitages like this one that are called cells, where monks grow food for their ruling monastery, or operate workshops dedicated to various kinds of arts and crafts, such as icon painting or wood carving. There are also huts and cave dwellings of hermit monks who are called anchorites. At the tip of the peninsula, Mount Athos itself rises 6,670 feet, straight up out of the sea to its peak. Many anchorites, the hermit monks, live in the crevices and caves in these cliffs at the end of the peninsula. All of the monks on the holy mountain together number between 2,000 and 2,500, including the anchorites, and are members of one or another of the 20 ruling monasteries. Together, these monasteries constitute a monastic republic that has existed since the year 963, over 1,000 years, 1,061 years to be exact, and the Holy Mountain claims to be the world's oldest continuously existing democracy. Today, because of its historical and cultural importance, the Holy Mountain is numbered among the UNESCO World Heritage Sites. Returning to the map, this time a map of the Chalkidiki with its 3 fingers, you see the Athonite Peninsula at the upper right. As a semi-autonomous monastic republic that has survived since its foundation under the Byzantine emperors, the Holy Mountain flies the flag of the Byzantine Empire with its double-headed eagle on a gold field. Today it is a protectorate of Greece with its capital at the monastic village of Carriès, whose name appears on the map just below the flagpole. Zooming into the Athenite Peninsula itself, we can see a white line marking the border of the monastic territory, and near it, on the southwestern coast, is the village of Ourounoupolis, where my family stayed in the summer months. The capital, Carriès, is near the central ridge in the center of the peninsula. And southeast of Carriès, also near the ridge, is our destination, Philotheo Monastery. Finally, before we begin our virtual pilgrimage, I think it would be useful to know how this Holy Land came to exist as a land of large monasteries like this one, and to understand some of the ideas central to the monastic tradition there. In the 8th century, the Athenite Peninsula was an uninhabited wilderness. 5 small cities existed here in the early centuries of the Byzantine Empire, cities that had existed since the classical era and were mentioned by ancient Greek historians. But those cities were abandoned because of repeated attacks by pirates. Then, around 750 of the Common Era, 750 AD, intrepid individuals began coming here to become anchorites. The term anchorites means people who have retreated or withdrawn, in this case, from the world. Here in the Athenite forests, they built small thatch-roofed huts of wood called monies, or cells, and lived off the nuts and fruits that grew abundantly here. Why were these early anchorites attracted to this Athenite wilderness? In fact, they were following a long tradition that became prevalent in the 3rd and 4th centuries. That is, the tradition of monks living lives of asceticism in the deserts of Egypt and the wild and uninhabited places of Palestine and Syria. The word asceticism is derived from the Greek word askesis, which related originally to athletics and military training. It meant practice or exercise or training. The later Greek moral philosopher used the term askesis metaphorically, meaning a way of life characterized by abstinence from worldly luxury and devotion to practicing the moral virtues. For the early Christian monks and hermits, the objective of the life of askesis was to work toward complete suppression of self-will. Because these early Christian philosophers had come to understand from their experience and their reading of scriptures and the early Christian writers, that it is our own will, our willfulness, that stands between us and God, blocking our ability to sense the divine energy at work in this world, and making us resistant to the Holy Spirit and the divine will that desires for us only our salvation. Because of the profound spiritual insight they gained from that mode of life, these early anchorites came to be seen as holy men. Then people like us began taking pilgrimage into the deserts to receive blessing from the monks and to absorb their wisdom. The anchorites, who thought of themselves as living outside of the world, called their visitors kosmiki, meaning people of the world. I should emphasize that there were also women among the hermits of the Egyptian and Syrian deserts who were revered in the same way. So, starting sometime around 750 of the Common Era, this phenomenon of anchorites seeking God and salvation in the deserts through askesis was extended into the wilderness of Mount Athos. During the next 2 centuries on Mount Athos, from 750 to 950, as the number of these hermit monks grew, they formed lavras. Lavras are the oldest monastic foundations on Mount Athos, small communities of hermits living in isolation for the sake of askesis, but in close enough proximity to be able to help each other as needed. These communities gradually organized themselves enough to build central churches where they could worship on Sundays and festal days. The capital, Carriès, and Philotheo Monastery began as lavras and are therefore the oldest continuously existing foundations on Mount Athos. Things changed abruptly on Mount Athos in the year 963, when the Byzantine Emperor Nicephorus Phocas gave a lot of money to his close childhood companion Athanasius, later known as Saint Athanasius of Athos, to build the first Cenobitic monastery, that is, common life monastery, which was then named the Great Lavra. Suddenly, it was possible for kosmiki, who were drawn to the spiritual life and the study of theology, to come to this holy land to be tonsured as monks and practice a more civilized ascesis, eating regular food on a regular schedule in an imperial monastery. From Constantinople, it was a reasonable boat trip to Mount Athos. So from the great city of Constantinople, young men flocked to the new imperial monastery on Mount Athos. In the course of the next century, the number of Cenobitic monasteries increased rapidly, and many of the early lavras reorganized themselves as monasteries. That is how historians recount the early history of this Holy Land. But Athonite history, or Athonite oral tradition, tells a very different history of origins. It began when the Virgin Mary embarked on a boat trip to Cyprus to visit Lazarus. After Jesus resurrected him, Lazarus had gone to Cyprus as a missionary for the new religion. A terrible storm came up, and when the boat was in danger of capsizing, Mary prayed to her Son for deliverance. And soon after, the boat ran safely aground on the nearby Athonite shore. Mary then declared that this land would thenceforth be a holy place, to be occupied only by her own holy monks, who would come here and dedicate their lives to her and to caring for her sacred place. From that day on, no women were ever to set foot on the Athonite peninsula, not even female domestic animals. If you are familiar with the term etiological myth, a myth that accounts for how things got to be the way they are, you will recognize this as a perfect example. In fact, it's the normal practice that women are not admitted to men's monasteries and men are not admitted to women's monasteries. Mount Athos, throughout the Middle Ages and down to the present, has been known as the Garden of the Panagia. Panagia, meaning all holy, is a traditional name for the Virgin. And the word garden is paradisos, that is paradise, the word used in the Greek Old Testament for the Garden of Eden. The entire holy community of Mount Athos is dedicated to the Virgin Mary, and her monks are dedicated to the stewardship of this paradise as the Garden of the Panagia, that is, a new Eden. Now we begin our virtual pilgrimage with a symbolic slide. Two pilgrims about to arrive at the Athonite monastery of Ivirun, the monastery of the Georgians that I mentioned earlier. For our pilgrimage to the Holy Mountain, we will be arriving from the world at this same monastery. But like the Virgin Mary, we will be arriving by boat after crossing the waters from the secular world. As we set out, we are those people that the monks call kosmiki, people of the world, coming here to discover what monks have known for over 1,000 years. In this holy land, the fundamental realities are not material, but spiritual. Mount Athos is one of those places we refer to with a special term, axis mundi, the center of the world, or better, the spiritual center of the world. In this place, human buildings reveal a harmony with the natural world as both reach upward toward God. It is this vertical spiritual axis that pilgrims come here to discover. When as pilgrims we are immersed in a different experience of reality, we find our perspectives being gradually transformed by it. The monks have a different way of expressing it. They say that the presence of the Panagia, the mistress and protectress of all life in her garden, is felt everywhere. Each day, as I began my work in the library at Philotheu, the librarian, Father Lucas, began his day by greeting the Panagia. He would recite an ancient hymn that begins, Chera nymphi, greetings, maiden. Will we be able to sense the presence of the Panagia ourselves in this holy place? Because our destination is Philotheu Monastery on the east side of the peninsula, we departed from the world of the Kosmiki at the village of Yerissos. We rounded the spur of the peninsula and sailed down along the rocky northeast coast. We will disembark at the dock of Iviron Monastery, the monastery of the Georgians. Then our route will take us upward toward the crest of the peninsula, past Karakalu Monastery and on to Philotheu, the highest and most remote of the monasteries. As the sun rises over the crest of the peninsula, we catch our first sight of Iviron, its tower illumined by the early morning light, with Mount Athos in the background. From the dock of Iviron Monastery, we begin our hike that will take us 1,800 feet upward to the verdant plateau once known as Pteris, ferns, where Philotheu Monastery is located, almost directly above Iviron. Walking slows down our worldly pace of life and brings us into closer touch with the natural world and spirit of this place. Mount Athos in the spring is indeed the garden of the Panagia, alive with flowers, and because of its unique history, it is home to flora and fauna found nowhere else on earth. Can we begin to experience the presence of the Panagia as we walk? The road you see here is one of the ancient Athenite highways. These old roads were paved with natural stones back in the Middle Ages. This paving, called calderimi, was designed to provide good footing for mules and horses, but it isn't so easy on human feet. Leaving the calderimi highway for the path to Philotheu, we come to another crossing of the waters where we can truly appreciate the protection of the Panagia. Places like this are microcosms of the pilgrimage itself, what cultural anthropologists and sociologists call liminal moments, or thresholds of transition, moments when we are neither where we were nor yet where we are going, moments when we feel tension between those previous and new worlds and wonder if we really belong here, or if this pilgrimage was really such a good idea. But we leave the security of the solid road proceeding in faith. The rapids below are a long way down. The monks, who always look through or beyond the physical for true meaning, would see this bridge as a metaphor for the precarious passage from this life to the one beyond. We pass a sign for Karakalu Monastery, only a few minutes away. We are now less than an hour from Philotheu. Since we need a break after a boat ride that started before dawn and our arduous uphill trek, we take a brief side trip to see Karakalu Monastery. It's a beautiful old monastery with its ancient stonework and tall defensive tower. The courtyard is small and tight, and like the roads, it is paved in calderimi, because the mules needed solid footing for bringing in firewood and supplies. The furno, the bakery, is the building ahead. You can see the large chimney above its roof. We find no one in the monastery, and the church is closed. This is a poor monastery, occupied by only a small number of monks. Some of them may be inside at work in the incense workshop, but most of the monks are probably out working in the gardens and orchards. so we decide to rest a bit and rehydrate at the fountain in the courtyard. Before leaving, we take a closer look back at the tower. We get a good view of the inverted crenellations that shield openings. These are portals from which the monks poured down flaming oil, called Byzantine fire, on attacking pirates. You can still see the stains down the sides of the tower. At the same time, other monks would shoot from the crenellations at the top of the tower. The idea of monks fighting with flaming oil and guns may seem surprising, but piracy was a major scourge throughout the Byzantine Middle Ages and the post-Byzantine era. At this very monastery, before they built this tower, pirates captured all of the monks, looted and burned the monastery, and sold the monks into slavery. What saved the monks was that some other monks from the Great Lavra, pretending to be slave traders, purchased the Karakalu monks and settled them in some farms owned by the Great Lavra to work off the cost of their rescue as indentured servants. In addition to the slave trade, here is another reason for the piracy. The Byzantine emperors, their family members, and the Byzantine nobility gave precious gifts for the salvation of their souls, which they felt were burdened with the many sins that were demanded of them in serving the needs of the government and the military. To be more accurate, these persons made gifts not to the monastery, but to the panagia of this or the other monastery. This particular item is a ruby, emerald, and pearl-studded reliquary, which once apparently held a relic related to the descent of Christ from the cross. Sometimes there was cash to be had in the monasteries, since these noble families also donated money to restore buildings or build new ones, or to paint or restore frescoes in the church, in return for which the monks would pray for the forgiveness of their sins and the salvation of their souls. The prospects of great wealth drew pirates to the monasteries again and again throughout the Byzantine and post-Byzantine eras. Resuming our uphill trek to Philitheu, we arrive in less than an hour, in plenty of time for the beginning of Vespers. You can perhaps see that the monastery's arched entryway was built later than the rest of the monastery. Before that time, before the 19th century when this entry was built, this monastery was very plain and relatively poor. When I came here in 1977, there were three or four elderly Russian monks. One of them spoke some English and told me that until a few years earlier, there were 6 of them, the last monks left in the monastery, and they had to tend the monastery completely by themselves. Every day, he said, they prayed to the Panagia to intercede for them with her son to bring them relief. Then one day their elder had a vision in which he saw young, vigorous monks repairing the monastery, and there were flowers everywhere. And the next day a group of young monks did arrive, asking if they could come to stay because their brotherhood had outgrown the small hermitage where they had been living. As we enter, we can see the vision of the old Russian monks had come true. The courtyard has been planted with grassy lawn covering the original Calderimi paving, and flowers bloom everywhere, a microcosm of the garden of the Panagia. Upon arrival, we find our way to the reception hall, up on the second level of open arches, where we are shown to some chairs and offered refreshments. The traditional Athonite welcome is a glass of chipuro, which is raki, and Turkish delights. You can see I did not have a photograph of our welcome, but maybe this conveys the idea. How appropriate to be welcomed with spirits. After we sign the monastery's guest book, the guest master shows us to our rooms. He tells us that the priest, Papa Stephanos, will open the church in a half hour so that we can tour it and venerate the relics that are kept there. As we saw earlier, the monastery church stands in the center of the square courtyard. The The churches on Mount Athos are generally oriented on an east-west axis. So as you enter on the west side of the church, you are facing the altar and the sanctuary at the opposite end of the church, where the Eucharist is conducted. And you are also looking east toward Jerusalem, the place of Jesus' crucifixion and the first Eucharist. Opposite the entrance is the stairway into the trapeza or refectory, and between them is an octagonal outdoor baptismal font. The marble panels you see between the slender pillars of the baptismal font were salvaged from the ruins of the ancient abandoned city that I mentioned earlier, which was located near where the monastery now stands. A half hour later, we find ourselves inside the church, where the priest and the sexton have set out the monastery's holy relics for veneration by today's pilgrims. The pilgrims process in a line along the front of the table, venerating each relic with a kiss as they pass by. The priest or sexton walks along with the pilgrim on the opposite side of the table, touching each relic with a piece of cotton wadding as he passes. When we reach the end of the table, he gives us the cotton wadding as a blessing, to carry with us back to the world when we leave, a physical token of the presence and blessing of the saints that we venerated. Among the relics is the right hand of St. John Chrysostom. Notice the missing fingertips? Those were broken off at various times by Philotheite priests and given away to other monasteries founded by Philotheu in other places, including the United States. This is a traditional way of sharing the blessings of the saint and of this monastery with the new monastery. After venerating the relics, we have some time to walk around the monastery or to unpack our packs in our rooms and rest before the celebratory church services for the festival begin. Yes, I didn't tell you before that the day of our arrival would be the festal day, a liturgical festival, when monks and pilgrims alike spend the whole night in church. If you'll pardon the pun, I wasn't sure that we Kosmiki would be up for an all-nighter of worship in the church. Liturgical festivals are the celebrations of major events in the life of Jesus and his mother Mary. Or they may be the celebration of the foundation day of the monastery, or of the feast day of the patron saint of the monastery. So we will be participating in an all-night celebration of joyful choral antiphonal singing that commemorates and celebrates these events, followed by a few hours more for the services of matins and the liturgy. But don't worry, we can come and go during the service to get refreshments as needed to keep us going. The all-night vigil will begin with great vespers, not long from now, so we opt for some rest up in our rooms. The life pattern of the monks is set by beating the wooden sementrone, a large wooden plank made on Mount Athos of native chestnut, and ringing the bells. You can see a sementrone in the lower tier of this bell tower at St. Catherine's Monastery in the Sinai. These sounds awaken the monks from sleep and call them to church, to meals, to prayer times and the penances of the monks' ascesis, to bed, and again to wake up and begin the cycle anew. From this point onward, we pilgrims too will be following the routine of the monks. This means the rhythm of life now changes to Byzantine time. On Athos, days begin at sunset, as they did in Jesus' time. And the date is now 13 days ago, because we are no longer following the modern Gregorian calendar, but the former Julian one. Around 4:00 p.m., we hear the first call to great vespers. Returning to the monastery courtyard, we find the Philotheite fathers gathering for the service. Fresh in from the gardens, the incense workshop, the bakery, and other labors, the monks are preparing for the service, each putting on his best robe, his raso, over his work clothes. I have to insert here a little story about the sementron for Vespers. One day when I was working in the library, I came across a note in the margin of a manuscript, apparently by a scribe whose work was interrupted by the sounding of the sementron for Vespers. Otanakuis to semantron treche. That's what it read in the margins. When you hear the sementron, run. I read this note to Father Lucas, the librarian who was there in the library with me, and he chuckled as he imagined the scribe setting aside his work halfway through a sentence and setting aside his own desire to finish the page, to obey the call to church. That is ascesis, the suppression of personal willfulness. From then on, every day when the sementron for Vespers began, Father Lucas would repeat to me, Otanakuis to semantron treche. The main feature of Vespers is the antiphonal singing of the Psalms in the sanctuary. But then, embedded within the service of Great Vespers, is a separate service for commemoration of the saint or saints of the day, which is celebrated in the narthex rather than the sanctuary. Together with the Philotheite fathers, we move out to the narthex. There, on the walls around us, we see depicted the saints and the monks of the past. Some protective warrior saints stand over the monks' stalls on another wall. Among the saints, painted near the entry to the narthex, is this 16th century abbot of the monastery, Saint Dionysios of Olympus. Saint Dionysios makes the sign of blessing over us as we enter, affirming to us that here in the church we are safe from the devil and the forces of evil. In church, we are in the sacred center of the Orthodox world, an Orthodox axis mundi. After Vespers, monks and pilgrims together all leave the church to begin the new day, going directly across from the church into the trapeza for supper. Like this monk, we eat in thoughtful and contemplative silence as the reader reads to us from the lives of the saints or homily from the early church fathers. The monks who are serving and clearing tables continuously repeat the prayer of Jesus as a mantra while they work. Kyrie Jesu Christe eleison me, Kyrie Jesu Christe eleison me, Kyrie Jesu Christe eleison me. Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me. Consider the kind of mindfulness that this practice, this ascesis, creates for them as they focus on this prayer that is also a confession of faith while they work. Following the meal, the monks will have some time to mingle with us pilgrims in the courtyard or outside the gate and share with us the wisdom of the ancient ascetics. But soon they retire to their cells for their daily practice of evening devotions and penances. And did you hear that word again, practice? Ascesis? The night is the time when personal demons and temptations become very present, and the regular practice of prayer and meditation helps the monk to resist those thoughts, refocus, and open himself to the presence of God. On this particular night, this time is a preparation for the Agrypnia, or all-night vigil, that is the centerpiece of the festival. Before long, the Agrypnia begins, with the Simantron sounding again to call the monks and us pilgrims back to church. On a normal non-festal night, the monks would have about 4 hours of sleep, roughly until about 2 o'clock in the morning, when the Simantron would awaken them for matins, followed directly by the liturgy and then breakfast. Then they would get another 4 hours of sleep after breakfast. So they normally get the best 4 hours of sleep twice a day. It's a healthy system. But this is a festal night. No sleep tonight. In the semi-dark, we all find places in the stall-like seats around the narthex of the church. We see again, now by the dim light of candles, the saints and martyrs of the past, painted on the walls around us. In this light, it seems as if we are standing in their midst, and we feel their eerie presence all around us, especially the saints and martyrs of Philotheu, who once attended these services, occupying these very spaces. The vigil culminates with the liturgy and the Eucharist. Then the monks move forward from the narthex into the sanctuary through the 2 curtained doorways. Do you recall the curtain at the entrance to the Holy of Holies in the temple that was split at the moment of Jesus' crucifixion, symbolizing the idea that now all may pass with Christ through the curtain into the presence of God? We are now in the sanctuary under the main dome of the church, in the presence of Christ Pantocrator, Christ Almighty, or better, Christ ruler of all. He gazes down upon us from the inside of the dome high above. At night, the golden halos gleam in the candlelight of the dimly lit church. The rhythmic chanting and the incense draw all our senses beyond the confines of this room. Now, the large candelabrum hanging below the dome is slowly swung in a gradually widening circle, so that the shadowy figures on the walls seem to sway from side to side. We look upward at the swaying candelabrum and lose our sense of physical orientation in the semi-dark. As we gaze upward, beholding the chorus of angels around Christ, the ruler of all, we feel transported out of the physical materiality of this world, the cosmos, drawn upward toward heaven itself. Some of the monks, prepared by fasting and their ascesis of prayer and penance leading up to the festival like a Lent, have what we call out-of-body experience, as if floating upward from this physical world toward heaven, while looking down on their physical selves seated in their stalls in the church. Experiences like this are understood as premonitions of the metamorphosis, the Greek word for the transfiguration that awaits all who take up the cross of Christ and follow him, the message of the gospel account of Jesus' own transfiguration on Mount Tabor. On the peak of the mountain is a small chapel dedicated for that reason to the metamorphosis, the transfiguration. The line between symbol and reality as we know it disappears. The icons painted on the church walls and domes become windows into the heavenly realm of the saints and martyrs. They bring us to a place where the fundamental reality is no longer this physical cosmos, but the spiritual world of eternity. Outside the church, the service culminates with sunrise, and the symbolic language of the Gospel of John becomes real for us, of the light coming into the world. The liturgy continues to its end, and then the monks leave the church, followed by the pilgrims. We process to the trapeza, the refectory, directly opposite the church entry, to partake of the festal banquet that awaits us there. Symbolically, we are moving from east, the holy place, Jerusalem, to west, the place where the day ends, a symbol of mortality, a premonition of our return to the world. As we exit from the inner narthex, we see this painting beside the doorway. It depicts a monk on the cross, under attack from demons representing the 7 deadly sins, while his guardian angel brings the crown of victory to the victorious dying monk. On the left, from top to bottom, are the demons of love for money, adultery, gluttony, and laziness or restlessness. On the right, from top to bottom, jealousy, pride, and anger. This painting is there to remind each monk, as he leaves the sacred space of the sanctuary, where he is safe from the devil, that he is returning to the outer world, the arena of spiritual warfare, where he must himself endure assault by the various demons of temptation. The image of the monk crucified also reminds him that when he was tonsured a monk, he donned his black robes, the very robe in which he will one day be buried, to symbolize that he had died to earthly life, to take up the cross of Christ. This image reminds him that now, together with Jesus on the cross, he must take up his own cross and continue his ascesis until the end, and only then will he gain the angelic crown of victory. The festival continues with a litany and a great feast in the trapeza, but we need to stop at this point and leave this holy land to return to our own world. I hope you have enjoyed this virtual pilgrimage to the Holy Mountain, which has taken us also into the world of a Christian tradition that for most of us is very different from our own. I hope it helps us all to appreciate also the breadth and depth of the spiritual riches that are embraced by this Christian faith of ours. And most of all, I hope this virtual pilgrimage brings a new dimension of insight to your own Lenten journey. Thank you.